Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for your patience. We were giving it a couple extra minutes for folks to sign on, and I'm sure we'll have additional people trickling in this morning. We really appreciate you taking some time this morning to chat about the elections here in North Carolina and what our team anticipates going into the 2021 legislative session. By way of introduction, I'm John Harden. I'm a partner here at Manning Fulton Skinner and have been I've been here for the better part of a decade working on legislative issues, and we represent a broad array of clients from several Fortune 500 companies to nonprofits to startups. Also here today is Will Morgan. Will is also a partner here at Manning Fulton and has been working on the team for just over 4 years. In addition to Will and myself, our team consists of Mary Selvage, who helps run the day-to-day operations of the practice and manages a number of the trade associations we represent. And recently we hired one of the current North Carolina House Speaker Tim Moore's senior policy advisors, a fellow named Lewis King, who prior to working for Speaker Moore worked for Senator Thom Tillis. We intend to keep today's presentation fairly high level. Will is going to cover the election results first, and then I will dive into what we anticipate the big topics to be going into the legislative session, which, as I mentioned earlier, begins next year in mid-January. And we're certainly, to the extent Will and I can figure out the technology, we are certainly happy to answer questions or address any other topics that you all would like to discuss. I'll hand it over to Will to introduce himself and to get into the election results, and just would thank you all again for taking time this morning. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, John. As John mentioned, my name is Will Morgan, and John and I run the government relations practice here at Manning Fulton. And the primary purpose of today's webinar is to talk to you about what to expect from the 2021 legislative session that will start in January. But before we get into talking about the session, we wanted to spend a few minutes talking about the election that just finished or is still going on in some cases. A lot of what you and your organization can accomplish at the legislature in any given session depends on who controls the legislature and who's living in the governor's mansion. So we're going to talk a little bit about the elections that just finished up. This was an incredibly important election here in North Carolina this year. All eyes across the country were on North Carolina for a few reasons. One is that North Carolina was a key battleground state for the presidential election. Many analysts believe that President Trump could not win the presidential election without winning North Carolina, and that it was a key for Vice President Biden as well. The control of the U.S. Senate ran through North Carolina. The Democrats needed to net 3 seats to take control of the U.S. Senate, and that would have needed to include North Carolina. Also, we had one of the most competitive gubernatorial races in the entire country, with Governor Roy Cooper running for re-election, as well as one of the most competitive attorney general races in the country, with Attorney General Josh Stein running for re-election. And finally, another reason that this year's election in North Carolina was so important is that because 2020 is a census year, that means whoever won control of the legislature this year gets to control the redistricting process heading into the 2021 session, and that will help determine who controls the legislature for the next 10 years. So turning to the election results, as I'm sure you all know, President Trump did carry North Carolina this year with just under 50% of the vote, 49.9% of the vote over Vice President Biden. Senator Thom Tillis, who was running for re-election for the first time, did narrowly defeat challenger Cal Cunningham. That outcome surprised a lot of people. Cal Cunningham was winning in most of the polls running up into the re-election, and the polling average on election day was Cal Cunningham was up by 2.6% going into election day. So that outcome surprised a lot of people. Governor Cooper did win re-election pretty handily over current Lieutenant Governor Dan Forest, and then Attorney General Josh Stein won his re-election as well. I won't go through all of the Council of State races, but the trend in the Council of State races was that across the board, the incumbents won their races for Council of State, both Democrats and Republicans. There were 3 open seats this year on the Council of State, which were labor, public instruction, and lieutenant governor. And the Republican candidate won all three of those open seats on the Council of State. Otherwise, the incumbents all won their races. Of course, for John and I's job, we were paying close attention to who was going to control the North Carolina legislature. Republicans currently control both chambers, and there was a lot of speculation this year that there could be a blue wave and that Democrats could have a chance at taking over one or both chambers of the legislature. That ended up not happening. So in the Senate, Republicans currently hold a 29-21 majority. After the election, Democrats did net one seat in the North Carolina Senate. So the new count in the Senate is 28 Republicans to 22 Democrats. Over on the House side, Republicans currently maintain a 65-55 majority. And after the election, Republicans actually netted 4 seats in the House. So they now have a 69-51 majority. One thing to note about those margins is that they do not constitute supermajorities, which would be 3/5 of either chamber, which is important because that's the number of votes that it takes to override a gubernatorial veto. So Republicans will still not be able to override a veto from Governor Cooper without some Democrats joining them to vote to override. So those are the results. A little bit of analysis. I think overall this was a good year for Republicans in North Carolina. There was a lot of speculation that there would be a blue wave this year. There was a lot of obvious voter enthusiasm on the Democratic side, and it turned out that there ended up being a lot of voter enthusiasm on the Republican side as well. This was a record turnout year in North Carolina. Just as a point of reference, in 2016, overall voter turnout in North Carolina was 69%, and our record was back in 2008 when President Barack Obama won for the first time, and that was 70% voter turnout in North Carolina. This year we had 75% voter turnout in North Carolina, which does set a new record. 7.36 million people voted this year. A few other observations. I think it was obvious that President Trump did have some coattails in North Carolina this year. I think you see that in the Council of State races as well as the judicial races where Republicans won all of the Supreme Court seats and Court of Appeal seats that were up this year. While Governor Cooper did win fairly easily, he did not seem to have the same coattails that President Trump did. So overall, I think the takeaway from this year's election, as John and I have joked with a lot of our clients, is we spent hundreds of millions of dollars in North Carolina this year to have no real change in who's in charge in North Carolina. So we still have Republican majorities and we still have a Democratic governor in Roy Cooper. And so in terms of what to expect over the next 2 years and 4 years, I think the power dynamics in Raleigh will look a lot like they have over the past 2 and 4 years in terms of the interplay between the legislature and the governor. So I'm now going to turn it over to John to talk a little bit about what the major issues that we should expect to come up in the 2021 session are.
Yeah, thanks, Will. And then one editorial comment before I get into that is folks who do what Will and I do for a living spent the last 6 to 9 months, and we see on the attendee list some folks who've done this a lot longer than I have. Randolph Cloud, our good friend, and Barton Culbreth, and folks like that. We all sat around wondering what would the legislature look like in the event that either the margins narrowed, Republicans lost seats, or Democrats took over one or both chambers. And in a lot of ways, what happened makes our jobs easier because we know what the political climate will be, what the priorities will likely be, and who the players will be down on Jones Street. In North Carolina, our sessions are technically 2 years long. So the first year begins in odd number years. So for example, 2021, and is colloquially known as the long session year. This is the session in which legislators begin to write the 2-year budget. This year, or the 2021 session, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, begins in mid-January, January the 13th. The goal is always to get out of session, to adjourn session by the 4th of July. North Carolina's fiscal year runs through June 30th. The idea is to write a budget and have it adopted into law by the end of the fiscal year and then wrap things up by the 4th of July. However, our sessions can go well into the summer and certainly have gone well into the summer in recent years. The second year of the session, which happens in even numbered years, is theoretically intended to allow legislators to come back to Raleigh with a chance to modify or tweak the budget in accordance with the revenue numbers. So we anticipate a few major issues will consume a lot of time and energy in 2021, and I'll walk through a handful of those. So number one is obviously the budget. As I mentioned, legislators will begin to write the budget during the first quarter of 2021. We expect there to be a shortfall in North Carolina. Every state is expecting a shortfall. However, North Carolina, for a number of reasons, is actually in better shape than some other states. North Carolina's budget is typically around $24 billion. That's how much we spend here. And depending on the shortfall this year, that could obviously change. Governor Cooper and his budget staff, along with appropriation chairs at the legislature, are waiting on final revenue numbers so that they can begin to put together a plan and know with more certainty what they can prioritize in terms of spending their money. Additionally, there's continued speculation that Congress may get its act together and provide states with additional relief in early 2021. Governor Cooper and his staff, along with North Carolina legislators, are certainly anxious to determine what, if any, additional relief they will receive. Obviously, earlier this year, Congress did provide states with significant resources to help with any number of priorities, and part of the earlier session this year was for legislators to come in and appropriate the CARES Act money. There are always a few big ticket budget items, teacher pay, some obvious healthcare issues, but this year, one bipartisan issue that we are anticipating is a push to provide broadband access across the state, particularly to rural areas. Democrats and Republicans agree that this should be a priority, and particularly given the effects of COVID on our school systems, it's more important now than ever that everyone have reliable access to internet. So I think you'll see a significant push and likely some state money spent on that priority. The second major bucket of issues we anticipate saying will be additional COVID-related issues. There will obviously be both business-related and healthcare-related issues that arise. North Carolina businesses received some limited immunity from COVID-related claims during this year's session. I anticipate that with continued Republican control of both legislative chambers, we may see some additional protections granted to businesses across the state. There will also be significant discussions, even at the state level, about vaccine distribution. It's obviously the goal of folks in DC, but also those here in North Carolina, to get the vaccine out as quickly and efficiently as possible. And I anticipate that there may be some state funds set aside to help with those efforts. Yesterday, Governor Cooper and Secretary Cohen had a press conference in which they talked very, very specifically about the state's vaccine distribution plan, and they anticipate actually having some vaccines here in the state within a month and starting to give them to a number of first responders and healthcare workers, with the idea that more robust vaccine distribution will happen early in 2021. There will obviously be lots of discussions in the COVID space about how to manage our school systems and getting kids and teachers back in the classroom in person in the safest and most efficient manner. The third big bucket will be healthcare issues. Healthcare issues are always a major topic in North Carolina and in state legislatures, but are certainly going to be in the new COVID world will take an even larger role. One of the things that everybody can anticipate hearing a lot more about is Medicaid expansion. It will continue to be a really divisive topic. Frankly, I don't anticipate much will change. We have not expanded Medicaid. Governor Cooper will continue to make it a priority, and I suspect that Republican leadership at the legislature will likely oppose any efforts. There may be some opportunities provided by to the states by a Biden administration that weren't provided by the Trump administration that could provide the states that haven't yet expanded Medicaid opportunity to do so. I had a conversation with somebody in the Cooper administration in the last couple of weeks about some hope that there may be flexibility from the Biden administration provided the state. We'll have to see. Additionally, the state is moving its Medicaid program to a managed care system. Several large managed care organizations will begin to manage the state's Medicaid population. North Carolina now joins a majority of states to manage their Medicare system in this manner. The go live date on that program is slated for the summer, July the 1st, and we do not anticipate at this point any significant delays there. The fourth big bucket deals with transportation issues, which have been widely discussed in the media and may affect many of you all and your businesses. The Department of Transportation's issues continue to be publicly discussed and discussed at the legislature. Earlier in the year, they found themselves in the hole, nearly $300 million. The department's woes they really preceded the pandemic and have been exacerbated by the pandemic. The state auditor, Beth Wood, earlier this year released an audit showing that the department overspent by $740 million last year. And the audit also found that there was functionally no oversight on how division leadership throughout the state spent money, and that NCDOT didn't base its projected spending for future years on the actual amount of money the agency had spent in previous years. There's a thought that the legislature could put together an infrastructure and transportation bond package to cure some of those issues. Senator Berger, the Senate President Pro Tem, has typically opposed bond packages. However, I think with the access to bonds and the current interest rates, it's incredibly appealing to legislative leadership as well as Governor Cooper to try to solve some of these issues with a bond package. So we'll wait to see both whether that materializes and whether it is in fact confined to infrastructure and transportation issues. I know that there are lots of other stakeholder groups who would like to be a part of a bond package conversation. I'll close my remarks and then we'll open it up. I think we've done pretty well on timing. We've got about 10 minutes for questions here at the end, but I do want to reiterate a point that Will made, which is really what the final priority of the legislative session will be. It is a redistricting year, so every 10 years when we get the census results, legislatures around the country begin to redraw both state legislative districts, but also congressional districts. By virtue of winning this year's elections, Republicans, for the second decade in a row, will have the opportunity to redraw the legislative and congressional maps. I don't think we'll see that process really kick into high gear until the summer. Obviously, the census results need to be aggregated, provided to the states, and then there will be a lot of lawyers and statisticians involved in providing legislative leadership guidance on how to best draw the districts. I will tell you that I have every anticipation that we will see a similar experience to the one that we've seen over the last decade, which is that Republicans will draw the districts and that various Democratic groups around the state will file lawsuits challenging the constitutionality and validity of those districts, which will be a long, tedious process, just as it was from really 2010 until 2019. So let me stop there and open it up to discussion. And if there are any additional topics folks on the call would like for us to talk about, or if you have specific questions, Will and I are certainly happy to dive into those.
Yeah, you should be able to submit questions through a chat bar on the right of your screen, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have. While we're waiting for one or two to come in, I'll just say a few words about kind of the process of the legislative session in the time of COVID. So we did have a few legislative sessions in 2020, and they did look a lot different than your typical legislative sessions. As with all things, there's some silver linings of this pandemic, and I think one is that the legislature has in some ways become more accessible. They've started streaming a lot more of their committee meetings and floor sessions. There was previously some audio feeds from committee rooms and the House floor, but there's now video feeds from most of the committee rooms where a lot of the meetings happen, as well as the House and Senate floor. And I'll also just say that John and I have found that legislators are now a lot more willing to do Zoom calls with us and with clients. It makes our jobs a lot easier in some ways, that we're not driving to all corners of the state to meet with legislators and educate them about our clients' priorities. So there have been some advantages in terms of the technology and the access that both us as lobbyists and the general public have to seeing what the legislature is up to. So we anticipate that will probably continue in the 2021 session. There was also some use of proxy voting, at least on the House side during the 2020 session, where if members were not comfortable being on the House floor for a vote, they could submit their vote to the House majority leader or minority leader and didn't actually have to be there in person, which is the first time that's ever happened at the North Carolina General Assembly. So I anticipate that we'll see some more of that, at least in the beginning of the 2021 session.
And one more thing I'll add, and it doesn't look like we have any questions, so we can wrap it up. You know, the benefit of the beginning of a biennium, so I mentioned earlier that North Carolina has a 2-year session, is that there are lots of new faces, there are lots of new members of the North Carolina General Assembly going into a long session year, and it's really an opportunity for the legislature and for Governor Cooper and for lobbyists like Will and me to hit the reset button and start to think about new priorities. And so to the extent that your organization, your business, folks that you work with have any sort of priorities, both in terms of passing bills, working against bills, or even simple things like educating members of the North Carolina General Assembly or members of Governor Cooper's senior staff and his agencies on your priorities, it's a really good time between now and the end of the year and going into the first couple of months of 2021 to think about that. And they're just unique opportunities. The first couple of weeks and sometimes even the first couple of months of a legislative session, what you'll see are legislators eager to take meetings, eager to learn about various industries and various industries' initiatives and priorities. And so you may have not thought about engaging with members of the North Carolina General Assembly. You may not think it's a priority, and it may not be, but it can be a really good time to sit down with folks and to engage and to educate them on the value of your business, the value of your industry in the state of North Carolina. And in the event that things do arise that could either benefit your industry, your business, or adversely impact it, you've got your foot in the door with a number of folks down on Jones Street. So I don't see any questions yet. We really appreciate everybody logging on this morning. I know it's a busy time of year between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Will and I have been digesting a lot of this information, and appreciate being able to spew it out to a lot of our friends and to folks who are friends of Manning, Fulton, and Skinner. And we hope that if you have any additional questions that have arisen based on what we've talked about, or you have just any question about what's going on in North Carolina politics or North Carolina state government, that you reach out to either of us. You can find our contact information on the website. We're available for better or for worse all day and all night and on the weekends. We'd be happy to chat with y'all. So we really appreciate it, and thanks to Alan and Jenny on our team here for setting this up, and we'll look forward to talking to some of y'all, and I hope everybody has a wonderful and blessed holiday season. So thanks, everybody.